Hello and salams. I'm Rabia and welcome to Hidayah's podcast, Istameh, bringing you cutting-edge dialogue on what it means to be LGBTQI+ and Muslim. Hidayah are a leading LGBTQI+ Muslim organisation that provides a vital nationwide support system for us and by us. The word Hidayah derives from the Arabic word for guidance. We're proud to bring you honest, raw and personal stories from our members so that you can better understand what life is like for us. This podcast will be discussing the concept of coming out and what it means to come out. Joining me today, we have Sameer, who is a scientist and part-time LGBT+ activist, Maria, an award-winning human rights defender who works for Stonewall, and Almass, a film and art director who is a visible member of Hidayah. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I thought I'd kick off this podcast with our first question, which is, what does coming out mean? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. So I think the phrase coming out is quite a bit redundant for me now, but it's obviously something that's very important that people need to go through. But coming out just essentially means being open about open in quotation marks, about your sexuality, your gender identity, and letting people around you know that you identify as a certain thing anywhere on the LGBT spectrum.
I think for me, coming out becomes a phrase that implies a one-off instance of a great dramatic reveal that suddenly everything becomes rosy and your life becomes wonderful and everything becomes kind of finite. But actually, it's a process. Some people never come out. Some people come out to some and not to others. And for me, coming out is not always something you do voluntarily. Sometimes you're kind of forced to come out by your circumstances. Sometimes you're outed. And coming out implies an agency, but actually we live in a world where some people don't have to come out because they are assumed to be the norm. Whereas the rest of us who are queer or different in some way are made to kind of reveal ourselves as though we are something kind of to be observed. And I think that's quite damaging because over time you get this feeling that if you're not coming out, you're not being authentic. And I think that's something quite damaging. And I feel that it's not just being queer where I have to come out. It's also kind of being a Muslim because so many times if I come out, I'm also then forced to reveal other parts of my identity and explain them as well. So I think it's something that can be quite traumatic for some people.
Wow. Almass?
Yeah, I think jumping off on the back of those two very, very accurate, I think, descriptions, I think for me, coming out is an interesting concept because it feels a bit more of a declaration and forces transparency, and sometimes not necessarily in the safest places or not because you've chosen to and it feels comfortable, but actually because you are trying to maybe get people to understand who you are. And that is the bit that I think is what coming out is to, I think it kind of reveals other people's adjustments and where they are as opposed to where you are. Imagine if straight people had to come out. Imagine if everyone had to come out, right? And it just feels a bit weird that I should pick a moment, I guess, to say, hey guys, this is who I am, when actually every day is who I am. And if you see me and you feel me, that's who I am. And actually, Mario, really, when you said about saying that you're Muslim, I think that I've actually had to come out more as Muslim than queer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, because people are always like, well, are you sure? I didn't realise. Or, but how can you be? And I'm like, well, I'm not really sure what to say. Like, I exist and I'm here, so therefore I am, you know?
I mean, going back off what Almass said, it's true. Like, at one point in my life, I had to fight for people to accept that I'm gay, right? And then now it's more of a sort of, no, I'm also Muslim as well, because people have accepted the sexuality sort of side of things, but then the religion part garners more questions than sexuality, because it's always like, well, how can you be, right? And then that's now what I face, right, in comparison to earlier. But also, that's why, going off your answer, that's why I said it was a bit redundant to say coming out, because why should we, you know? Why should we have to come out? In an ideal world, we can just say like that we're gay and bring somebody home. It doesn't have to be a declaration, you know, because straight people don't have to do that. So why do we have to go through this sort of trauma and a negative experience? And, emotional burden to have to say those words, right? But having said that, like we've given some heavy answers, but coming out is a very enlightening experience as well. It can also be very obviously uplifting, and you can be proud of yourself that you came out, that it can give you a sense of pride as well to have done that, because it's also representing an overcoming of a barrier that you've put on yourself for so long, right? And then, it's, as people say, the cliche phrase, it's a weight lifted off your shoulders when you do it. But once you do it the first time, obviously that's when you're experiencing that. But then later in life, you do have to continually come out. And that's something that I think, all of us might experience, is that, when you go to a new job, when you meet new people, you have to constantly do it, right?
Yeah.
But it gets easier the more that you do, because you become more confident each time you say it, and the less you care about the reaction.
I think it is ultimately about ownership of who you are and how you want to kind of not just be described but treated. Especially like for me, being non-binary, people might kind of gender me in the way that they see someone who presents kind of in a more kind of feminine way that they would associate with being a woman. But the thing is, even though I've come out publicly before and it's kind of out there, when you Google me, it's right there. But I still find that even if I get a job and I introduce my pronouns, people think I'm coming out to them because they assume that because I'm brown and because I'm Muslim, I can't have come out before, that this is a special moment for them. And I'm like, you wish, babe. But it's just another thing, isn't it? You just have to, it's like you said, you have to keep doing it because people aren't ready to accept what you've already said 1,000 times.
Do you think it's necessarily harder or more difficult to come out as an LGBTQI plus Muslim?
I think it is hard to come out as an LGBT plus Muslim. Obviously, there are, very many obvious answers for why that is the case. But recently, I've felt like it's difficult to say that to sort of other people from other religions and other backgrounds, because they do face the same struggle that we do.
Yeah.
We just have the, the multi-layer of being, whatever cultural background we're from, the religious background, and then obviously our sexuality, right? So we're a minority within a minority within a minority community. And then especially, I always say that, I always joke that like my life would have been like even difficult if I was a woman, right? Because then it would have been even more. So for you guys, obviously, that you've got that added layer, which I wouldn't have experienced. But so I have a flatmate who is, he's white, he's born and raised in the UK, didn't have to come out to his family. They just assumed that he was gay, asked him if he was, and he said yeah. And then now when he finds it quite, like, not strange, but jokes that like, oh, you have brown privilege because you get to do all these things, that you get to like talk to the media and you do podcasts and you do all these things, which I don't get to do. And so I was like, well, that's because we have difficulty in sort of accepting ourselves a lot more, because I had, every member of my religious community telling me that I couldn't fundamentally be something that I am, that something that I didn't choose to be, something that I wasn't, sort of a deciding person behind. It just is, it is what it is, right? So yeah, you go through all those experiences for sure, which then make it difficult for you to, come out to your parents because you're worried about what they're going to say. And even to be openly gay within your community, like the Muslim community, is even harder as well, because you don't know how people are going to react, do you?
Yeah, for sure.
To build on that, first of all, I'm not going to lie, I was shook by the idea that we have brown privilege for being able to speak to the media, when actually, if you think about it, our identity has become a commodity to kind of show people's openness or inclusivity, when actually tolerance.
I hate
exactly.
that word.
Yeah, tolerance.
We've got tolerance. Why do you need to tolerate me?
Exactly, when actually all along we've
Like
been
great British
suppressed actively. Whether it's like you said about the great British values, bad words, I might call that. But it's the fact that over time, with the racialization of kind of people of color, with the fact, like the racialization of being a Muslim as well, the fact that over time there have been kind of substantive government policies that affect the way that our schooling works, the way that our media works, the way that we're even treated in terms of healthcare. It is no surprise that right now, in an age where kind of journalists and media are really excited to be able to point to their token kind of queer Muslim and say, oh my God, look, we're not Islamophobic, we're not queerphobic, end of story. it's quite rich that kind of people think that just because we have an identity, we have to be a spokesperson. And it's also rich that people think that they are entitled to our story, in the same way of kind of asking us straight away, how on earth were you able to come out? Didn't your family ... Didn't they disown you ... It becomes kind of a part of discourse rather than your actual life story, and it raises the nuances kind of the privilege that we have as well in order to be able to speak about this, no matter what problems and barriers that we face so far. And it's like you were bringing up about how Black people's experiences differ so greatly from brown people's experiences. It's like how Black Muslims are constantly erased from within this kind of chat as well. And I think that we all need to use this kind of moment to kind of have that moment of introspection, but also think, okay, when I speak, what is actually happening? What is the consequence of me saying yes to The Guardian next time they have a think piece? Am I actually doing people like me a service, or am I actually being manipulated for something else to make someone appear as though they are actually doing something when in policy they might actually have an organization that kind of actively erases and harms people like me? So it becomes a problem where coming out doesn't even feel like something that you own. It becomes something for someone else to talk about.
A few years ago, it was Eid, and we went to Bolton, and there was also a family funeral at the same time. And I remember just thinking, okay, well, I've got to go to this house, and I know we all have to wear scarves, but I don't wear scarves every day. So the internal dialogue was, how true am I being and to my authentic self? But also, why can't my Muslim part of me be part of my authentic self? So if my family are doing this, and we're all, my mum doesn't wear a scarf, but for this occasion, we all were. And I really had to sit down and embrace this other part of me, because I was like, well, the queerness is still part of me over here, but it can sit next to this Muslim part, which can also still shine. So I still wore the scarf, put up a picture on Instagram, all of that stuff. And but in a way that was celebrating this part of me and being allowed to be visible in both capacities. So I think the answer is for me, I know that there's a set of signifiers that I have to consider, and that's always going on in the back of my mind.
Would anyone like to share their personal story of coming out?
Coming out was, it was a very, very difficult experience. Absolutely one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But see, I say that now, and thinking back, it was just coming out now is so easy for me to do. When I tell people, meet new people, it was so easy. But back then, doing it for the first time, it was so hard. So when I came out, I did it first to my dad. He was the first person I ever told, and that was after years of sort of facing up to this challenge essentially in my head, where I thought that I was just going to be ostracized, and I had a whole fear basically of what was going to happen if I did that, right? So I grew up, when you're in a South Asian community, right, the cultural sort of expectation of a boy is that, you're going to be this dutiful son, you're going to get married to a woman. That was my narrative given to me, that was, fabricated from the things that I experienced growing up, that I'm going to be a dutiful son, I'm going to marry a woman, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to have the perfect nuclear family, and I'm going to have, a successful career, right? So that's what was expected of me. But I knew fundamentally as a child, because I knew I was gay when I was 8 years old, I'm pretty sure I knew in primary school, that, and I knew since then that when obviously being the sort of realities of being gay were apparent to me, I knew that I'm going to be a disappointment. I'm going to break the sort of, entire perfect nuclear family that my parents have worked to build. I'm going to be a shame, bringing shame to the family. I'm going to be, completely ostracized. They're not going to want to know me. So then whenever my family and stuff, we had sort of get-togethers, and there was all everybody being happy, it was so difficult for me to sort of be a part of it, because internally I knew that this is all going to break down because of me at one point. I had that burden of thinking that, right, at the age of 15, throughout my teenage years, right, when my primary focus should have been GCSEs and, thinking about, stuff that teenagers do.
It consumes you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it consumes you, and it literally became such a huge burden to deal with. But then it made me depressed. It made me have real bad anxiety, low self-esteem, all that sort of stuff, right? It really started a mental health turmoil. But then luckily, thankfully, a lot of people don't come through that, right? And we know that there's stories of loads of suicides. LGBT suicide is one of the highest rates in all the people that do commit suicide. And I did get to a point where that could have been my reality. But then I remember that's when I started to see visible people within the media who identified as gay. None of them were Muslim, none of them were South Asian, but they were, visible LGBT people that were doing good in the world and were respected by people and were successful, right? And then that was because I had, the internet in my hand, and I could obviously find bloggers and like people on YouTube who were sharing coming out stories.
Do you want to tell us of any of these personalities online, perhaps?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of them are like very famous ones. So Ellen DeGeneres was one of a big person who really helped for me, because seeing how loved she was and like how successful she was by openly being a lesbian, that was such like a huge example to me that like, oh, you can be gay and you can have a life. Your life isn't consumed by negativity all the time by being gay. It can be a positive thing, and that's something that she showed to me for the first time. People like, there was a blogger called Mark Miller who does a YouTube channel of him and his boyfriend, and he did a coming out video as well. I can't remember if some of the others off the top of my head, but all of them were white and cisgendered. None of them looked like me or had the same experience, but nonetheless it was very helpful anyway. And so then that sort of experience and having access to that material was able to then show me that, you know what, I want to be that person, right? That I can have that life. And then that was a switch for me when I realized, you know what, I want to be successful. I'm entering my 20s like very shortly. I do not want to enter that decade having the same experience I've had now, right? There is no chance in hell that that's going to happen, because it was such a negative, like sort of a real turmoil that I'd experienced, sort of coming to terms with it. And so then I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And then I had to prepare myself in very many ways to be ostracized, right? So I just accepted that if that was going to happen to me, then so be it, right? I called my friend and I said, can I please stay with you? I'll pack a bag. I'm going to come back to my family. Can I please stay with you? I expected the worst, right? And then for me also, I taught myself that like, if my family doesn't accept me and they don't love me anymore, then I'm going to have to just be prepared to accept that that is something that I'm going to live with. But then luckily I had a very, very opposite experience. And when I came out to my dad, literally I just said to him that I'm gay. He initially thought that I got somebody pregnant when I said that I've got something to tell him. And I was like, oh, kind of the opposite of that. Like, really not.
Good news.
Good news. It's not that, but it's something else. And then he was he was shocked. Don't get me wrong. Like, he literally had such a poker face. And I was like, do you want to talk to me about it all or anything? And he was like, no, not yet. So he processed it. And then, but on the same evening, he then came back to me and we had a conversation. And then he was open to the conversation. And that was something that I'm really thankful for, because I know that a lot of people don't have that, right? Because some parents have such an initial, anger, a reaction of anger, and can, for some people, become violent,
Yeah.
And that's a huge point that I want to make, is that there are positive stories of people coming out within our communities, whether they're South Asian, whether they're Muslim, whatever religion. There are positive, uplifting coming out stories. And all that was being shared in the media back then when I was growing up was just, LGBT Muslims that were on TV, their faces were blacked out. And for good reason, right? And I understand, obviously, why that experience happens. But for me, as an LGBT kid within that community, seeing that as, my representation on TV was always a taboo thing, made it even worse for me. And so thankfully I had a positive reaction, and I expected to have that, whole thing. But no, it was great. But we kept it from my mum, who's the more religious of the two. But then I ended up coming out to her on Father's Day, actually, which has kind of ruined the day for my dad. But no, we would, again, like, it comes back to the whole being a dutiful son thing. So my brother was expected to marry somebody, and my mum was picking faults at her, and saying like, oh, she might not be the best daughter-in-law for this and this reason. And it really bothered me, because I was like, you're only going to get one, And I was like, you're not going to get two. So if you don't like her, you can't get one from me. So then that's when it started to really become a thing for me, because I was like, she needs to know. I can't, I can't lie to her anymore. It's so hard to live a lie. And then I actually got really emotional, and then I couldn't tell her, but my brother then told her for me. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, and so then he said it for me. And then she cried and cried and cried, right? And I was like, oh no, like, I've destroyed her. I don't know how she's going to cope with this. But then, she really surprised me again as well, because she turned around and she said, when I asked her why she'd been crying so much, she literally said to me that, like, I can't believe that you knew that you were gay when you were 8 years old, and you're telling me now at the age of 20, 21. and you held that inside of you for so long. And part of the reason you couldn't tell me was because of obviously religious reasons. You thought that I was really religious, that like I wouldn't accept you. You know, she said that I felt guilty that as a mother, that like that's what you thought, right? That you couldn't tell me anything.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, and
That
I stood back and I was really surprised that I was like, you know, like, but that's the thing, you know, this is what my Muslim community told me. I was like, maybe you didn't say those words to me that you can't be gay, but that's what the South Asian Muslim community taught me, right? That I couldn't be, you know, openly gay to you, that I couldn't tell you that. And then that's when she was like, do you know what? Well, then things need to change, right? And so then, yeah, that's...
And are your parents, if you don't mind me asking, fully accepting of you now and supportive?
Yeah, my dad is. Mom still thinks that like, oh, it could be
A phase.
a phase and that it could be a change. And it's weird though, because like when you're an LGBT person as well and you're on the spectrum, I've had experiences recently where I'm like, I don't know, should I identify as gay? Should I identify as something else? Right, but that really freaks me out because I'm like, shit, is my mum's prayers working? Like, do you want to give it, like, you know, her du'as, are they working? Like, is that happening?
Oh my God. Aversion prayers.
Yeah, but but they're fully accepting. I can talk about it openly. I can say, you know, refer to the right gender when I want to talk about my love life, and I can say he, and it doesn't incite, you know, awkwardness, and it doesn't incite like a sharp intake of breath.
Wow.
And I'm also open to my extended family. I know I've gone on about this for a long time, but that's something that is quite a funny story that I like to share.
No, that's
so
fantastic.
with my extended family, my parents were like, you know what you're going to do? You're going to become successful, yeah? You're going to get your degree. You're going to... Yeah, you're going to get your degree, and then we're going to have a dinner, right? Like when you're 27, 28, right? And then everyone's going to be there, and then we'll announce it at the table. I was like...
That is so...
Yeah. I was like, okay.
Yeah. That's when you can reveal it.
Yeah, exactly, leverage, right? Because apparently it was good to have like something to fall back on, like, oh, he's gay, but he's successful, you know.
making
and
bank.
I was first
Say
of all,
something.
yeah, I was like, first of all, define successful, because like that's also a thing. But so what I decided to do is, I moved to London. I met a few people and at university, and me and my friend at uni, we were both talking about how desperately single we were at that time. And so then she was like, you know what would be a great idea if we both applied to first dates? So I was like, oh yeah, that would be great. So I applied, and then I actually got a call back, right? So then they started asking about, you know, your experience in LGBT Muslim. This would be a great thing to talk about, because we've never had that on the show. And obviously they had their agenda of wanting to obviously portray that, right? But I was like, do you know what? I'm all for visibility. If that's something that can help somebody out there to see that you can be, you know, LGBT plus and Muslim, then so be it. Then I'm going to take the opportunity. So then I did it, and then I never told the rest of my family that I was doing it, and I wasn't out to them at that point. My dad knew that I was going to do it, and but I was like, maybe not tell mum just yet. And then
Meanwhile, you're getting prepared to be on national television.
yeah, national TV. But at that point, I was very confident with my sexuality at that point, so I didn't care if anybody knew. So as I said earlier, I had to get to the point where if nobody accepted it, I just didn't care. Right, I had to really bring myself to that point. So then my date threw food at my face when I was there, right? So that meant that I ended up being in that advertisement, right, for the new series. Yeah. So that happened. And then my auntie calls my mum, was like, oh, so I've just seen Sam on TV. And my mum was like, oh yeah, that's happening. And then they all watched it. And then that's how then they realised that I'm gay.
Oh my God.
So that's how I came out to them.
Oh wow.
But then my dad then said that was a perfect way of doing it, because I didn't have to give an explanation, right? It was sort of a visual like explanation for them that all being gay means is being on a date, you know, and like not being on a date, but you know what I mean, like being just experiencing other stuff that straight people do, right? And it is nothing out of the norm, you know, and it takes away the hypersexualized idea that they've got of us. Yeah, your worst fears.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it didn't show like, you know, that we're all at chemsex parties and doing all that sort of stuff, you know, on a Saturday night. So
Not all of us.
yeah, not all of us.
For me, I relate hard when you mentioned the brush that you're painted of your own community, and not only your own community but yourself. Like you've got this idea that like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna be disowned, like my brothers are gonna come and beat me up, and like, you know, what all of this stuff going through my mind, and it really, I think, like kind of obscured my actual view of my family, because every day you see like those demonstrations of like love and like just, you know, banter and whatever it is. And then I've got this like massive like megaphone that's like coming in through the media, through examples that you see. And when I started this journey, I remember like first going out and being like, I just need to find an example. I really wanted to meet like me in like my 60s or like anywhere above kind of 40. I just wanted to meet like a queer brown woman who at the time I didn't even consider that someone could be Muslim as well. I just needed like a person of color that was queer, and I couldn't find anyone in my immediate circles. And that's not to say that they didn't exist, but I just think my viewpoint of stuff was just quite limited. And so the way that I came out to the world was my friend does makeup, and I got her to like do my face makeup, and my lips were rainbow, and then I put that up on like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter with a piece on just like what I was going through and like why I was doing this. And it was very much, I was saying that when I went through that process, I didn't have anyone, I couldn't find anyone that like looked like me, so there must be other people going through the same thing, so I'm gonna be that person hopefully for someone else, just be out there, so then my face is just there with this massive rainbow on my face. And so I did that, and I think my mum, I'd already come up to my mum before this, and I actually didn't come out to her. I was straightening my hair, I had longer hair then, and she came up behind me and she was like, is so and so your girlfriend? And I was like, crap. Like, oh my gosh, like this is the moment that you either lie for another like long period of time, or you just like rip it off like a plaster and it's done. So I turned around and I was like, yeah, like she's my girlfriend. And then my mum was like, so what does that mean then? And I was like, oh, she's my girlfriend, isn't it? I don't know, like that's what it means. And she was like, yeah, but like, are you lesbian? And I was like, I actually don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, all I know is that, like, I'm in a relationship and I really like this woman and we get on and we love each other. I didn't say any of this to her. I was too scared. But that was going in my head now. And so very quickly, I was being asked to, like, label and figure out who I was. And that's when I realized that all of the terms that, you know, people use to identify ourselves are actually functional for other people more so. And yes, for yourself to like help, like, you know, align yourself and figure out what it is. But I use the word queer instead of lesbian or bi because I also see myself as really fluid. And I guess the closest thing that I would find myself to in terms of sexuality is pansexual. And that's just because it feels like the most all-encompassing term that I found. But anyway, my mum will say she then left the room and went and sat on her bed and she had a little cry. And then she came back in and she was like, I'm just going to go to the post office. And then that was it. And then she carried on like with her errands. And it was so nice. I did feel like it was easier for me as a woman and having another woman's energy in the house. If my brothers were gay, then I think my mum still would have been really accepting. But I just think it would have been harder because there'd be times when my previous partner and I would just kind of be watching TV in bed or whatever. And my mum would come in, we'll watch TV together, have a chat. And I just think she'd find it harder with the boys. My brothers were really chill. My extended family don't know. But the reason why is because I think my mum... I'd like to speak to my mum about it first because I think that actually the consequences and repercussions are going to come down on her from the community, not on me. But it's also still doesn't stop me doing any of my visibility stuff. So actually, everyone probably knows, but just they're sitting with that discomfort, not me. And so that's cool. And so I think I do feel scared sometimes of family that I have abroad. But I just have to like kind of live my truth. And I feel like that's like the most useful thing is that I've always thought about being my most authentic self, whatever that means. And in turn, actually, it's allowed me to really push my openness towards other people and just be aware, like when something makes me feel like, oh, kind of check that a little bit because it's all about growth and unlearning, I think, like what we've been taught and all these ideas that you've been taught. And also in 2015, I went to Bangalore in India to film my debut documentary, and I went and connected and had loads of amazing conversations with the Hijra community in Bangalore. And so the Hijra community are
a community within the trans community across India, and it's very much based on like your socioeconomic status and your class. And I remember coming back and talking to my uncles, and honestly, well, it was like Eid day again. All happens at Eid, isn't it? But I was like, oh, I've just been to Bangalore. I did this amazing documentary, like such a big achievement for me, like first documentary. And he was like, oh, what was it on? And I was like, oh, was it on the Hijra community? And you know, like he just went blank. Like he just didn't even want to entertain like the conversation. And I was like, wow, like you've got such a warped cis-het view of what it means to be South Asian. I've gone and I've found real evidence and joy and celebration, and you can't even see that about your own people. And so the idea that I was fed not only by the media, but from my family that grew up in India and came over, was this very neat like idea, cookie cutter idea of what it means to be Indian and Muslim. And I don't think that they were ready and didn't like the bits that kind of seep out of that little cookie cutter bit. And so I really enjoy like exploring it more and more, and realizing when I go back home that actually like the conversations are like light years ahead.
Yes, I agree with you so much there,
of stuff in the West. Like it's mad. I just think that I've been given this like really like Disney idea of like what it means to be Indian and Muslim.
Absolutely,
and I was sitting in this room with like 50 Masis. I'm not even joking, yeah. And they were like, we don't subscribe to the construct of gender in Bangalore.
Wow, okay.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like I need to get my stuff together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. That's so true.
Yeah, I was like, wow, like because a lot of POC cultures actually believe in gender fluidity. I don't necessarily mean in terms of the concept we're speaking about right now, but you know, when we think about like deities and kings and queens, like those gender terms didn't actually really ever exist. And gender roles, depending on like what's politically is going on in a country, always are fluid. Yeah. Like you've always got people stepping in for various roles, and there's always power as well, like in different spaces. And so the coming out for me was really chill, but actually the thought process and the things that I had to weigh up in my head about the culture that I knew and the culture I was seeing versus the culture that was being told about myself was a whole different journey that I'm still on, you know, and I'm really looking forward to like continuing to work within the Muslim community specifically across all cultures and explore it a little bit more.
So, I feel like I should start with my childhood, take it back, you know, memoir style. But I was born with facial palsy, which paralyzed the left side of my face. So I kind of grew up with lots of kind of people tutting around me, saying I won't amount to anything, being worried about my marriage prospects. And so I always kind of had this weight on my shoulder about kind of being an overachiever. So that's why I am, a professional overachiever, which I feel like many South Asians will relate to. But yeah, so there was always this pressure to succeed. And I feel like I almost felt like I had to like overachieve with my coming out as well. And throughout my life, I've always been an activist. I joined a political party when I was 8 years old. That's when I made my first speech to kind of councillors and an MP about the Iraq invasion and how illegal it was. So I've never had this kind
to
of...
clarify, that was at 8 years old?
Yeah, I was,
Wow.
like
Okay.
I said, overachiever.
Okay. At 8 years old.
But like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'd always been very aware of my political surroundings. So it kind of only made sense that, you know, when I was first introduced to the idea of like what being non-binary is, my first thought wasn't so much about how do I reconcile this with myself, because I was quite a chill person. I always have been. It was more, okay, this is something I know about me, and kind of what can I do to make sure that I don't waste this opportunity? Because I've always thought about my responsibility in society, and knowing that I'm very privileged to have had kind of lots of opportunities to be a campaigner, and how can I use my voice to make sure that other people can raise their voices as well, because they definitely do exist. They'd maybe just being kind of drowned out. So I joined the young leaders program with the US Embassy, and a random opportunity came up, which was to see President Obama make his final state visit to the UK. And I was like, okay, I'll sign up for that, yeah? Just cash.
Just casually,
Why not?
Yeah.
Might as
Oh,
well.
President Obama, yeah, I'll go see
Go-
him. I'll make time for him.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah, you know.
innit? And then, lo and behold, I actually got picked to go. And when I got there, my typical like desiness kicked in, and I haggled my way to the front row to sit right in the middle. Yeah, made it there. And then they said, "Oh, Obama's gonna like shake the line. He's gonna shake your hand." I was like, "Oh my God, my life is made!" And I was really excited. But then he started talking, and he goes, "Oh, I'm going to take questions in a boy, girl format." And I was just sat there like, okay, first of all, that's really patronizing. We're not all children. Second of all, oh, I'm going to have to be the one to tell Obama what non-binary is. And then this is a kind of an underreported story, but actually, first of all, he said, sometimes in life to create change, you have to do something a bit crazy. So I yelled out, "Can I do something crazy right now?" And all the Secret Service just looked at me like, "Oh my God, here comes a terrorist." And I was like, "Oh, damn, how am I going to turn this around?" Because the Daily Mail were in front. They took a picture of me. I was like, "Oh my God, no, I don't want to be
Not
that
the
Ready
Daily
to create that
Mail.
narrative, ready to create that negative narrative.
So
yeah.
then, and he just goes, "No." And I was like, "Oh my God, my life is over." But then my life restarted when I put my hand up again. And he said, "Okay, you," because he clearly thought you have to have some kind of level of bravery, I guess, to yell at Obama and not get shot. So, so then I started off by telling him and coming out to him as non-binary on kind of national TV in front of all the world's media. But I also used that opportunity to highlight kind of the terrible transphobia that was ongoing in North Carolina and other US states where trans people were going to have to kind of prove their identity and kind of go to the wrong toilet associated with identity on kind of like birth documents and things like that. And it was just all so messed up. And I said to President Obama, I said, "Look, okay, in 1 year, I'd helped the civil service rehaul their attitude to kind of trans inclusion. Why can you not even say one sentence in support of trans people in America right now? Why can't you use your power? Because there are people like me in this country, there are people like kind of me in the US who've been fighting for recognition for such a long time. It's your duty as the leader of the free world, as so many people call you, to say and do something about it." And he gave quite a disappointing response about the difference between state and federal law. And I just thought, okay, this is a bit of a cop-out. The audacity I had of kind of coming out led to this massive media moment where there was so much pressure on Obama that he did eventually speak out on it and introduced kind of US-wide legislation on inclusion in schools for young people who are LGBT. And you would have thought that I'd be really proud in that moment. You would have thought that I would have sat back and thought, "Oh my God, yes, I've done like my life's work. It's all good for me now." But I just went, "Oh shit." The gargantuan kind of repercussions that I hadn't even considered properly in that moment because I was so kind of pent up in doing the activist thing that I forgot that I hadn't actually come out to my family yet. Yeah. So in between kind of leaving that room and like all these celebrities and TV people coming at me, interviewing me, whatever, I was just kind of focused on the fact that I still hadn't told my family yet. And I felt so guilty and I felt really upset because my whole life has been about the importance of family, the importance of like respect for your parents. And I felt like I was doing an important thing, but what feels important in the bigger scheme of things doesn't always feel important when you're on the front line. Like you said, your parents facing that daily battle. And so when I got home, it was quite tense. And I'm not going to go into like detail because I don't want to hurt anyone. But my dad was the one who really impressed me because he said, "Well, don't worry about what anyone's saying. Wow, you got to meet Obama." And then he goes, "Well, you've always been a son and a daughter to me. And, you know, if there's anything you ever need, you just have to ask me." And I just thought, wow, so many people spend so much time kind of really maligning Pakistani Muslim men as being kind of antiquated and backwards and kind of, anti-everything, when actually they also want to feel loved. And the bond, I think, between me and my dad really strengthened that day because I saw him defend me against so much vitriol. And I was really, really harassed in terms of people making videos about me that I had to report to the police. They were going viral. They were like people within my own community, people I knew who'd paid people to harass me. And
That's really messed up.
it's really messed up. And at the same time, I was getting kind of letters and emails and all kinds of support pouring in from all around the world, apart from the people in my local town. And that was like, oh my God, you guys, you're so wrapped up in wanting to hate me as a figure for kind of whatever you hate that you can't see the fact that, what we've actually done here is something monumental. When doesn't someone get the opportunity to do something like that? And I am actually really proud of it. And now, what I find really funny is that we don't talk about me being non-binary. We don't talk about my activism. But if you go in the living room of my house, there's a letter from Obama that mentions that I'm non-binary, and there's a medal that I got for being being an activist.
Oh my
There's all
God.
this stuff right there, and nobody ever talks about it. But I'm really grateful that I have kind of that inner resilience that I've kind of unfortunately had to build over time, and that I have a supportive network of friends, and that even though I can't really be properly out all the time, at least I personally feel like whatever I did, no matter how much hurt it caused me personally, the things I've gone to do since then, like becoming an expert at the UN, who would have thought that like me, like whose family come from a tiny village in Pakistan, would end up being a UN expert? Like, who would have thought of these things? Like, the amount of power that has come from that moment. I don't want anyone else to ever feel as disempowered as I have, of other people I know have felt over time. And so if that means that I have to make that sacrifices which South Asians are really familiar with, then I'm happy to do that, because for me, my life's purpose is to use the gifts and the privilege that I have to make the world a better place.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is so powerful. And thank you so much for sharing that. Wow, each and every one of your stories is really phenomenal and really wonderful to listen to. So thank you. Final question. What advice would you give to LGBT plus Muslims who may be struggling with their identity and who may not have come out yet?
Something that I have recently sort of been thinking about is that for LGBT Muslims, we need to realise that coming out will put us, well, those who haven't come out, will put them on the right side of history, right? Because if you think about it, there was a point in the world at one point, like not very long ago, like maybe 100 odd years ago, where people used religious text to condone the unequal treatment of races, right? Which led to, slavery and all sorts of things like that, right? And women didn't have equal rights. Not a very long time ago, right? Very small fraction of time ago. So coming out will definitely put you on the right side of history, because can you imagine 100 years from now when people have to learn about the fight that LGBT people had to, be visible? They would find it very strange, like how we do of the people of the time, that all that time ago, that they actually allowed religious texts to, to not agree with us and to not let us have equal rights, right? So coming out and being visible within the South Asian community, it's sort of like making a statement, and you're putting yourself forwards to show other people that, we are who we are, and there's power and visibility.
I think I have 3 tips. So my first one is find your people, and they don't have to look like you or speak like you. Okay. I think there's a big pressure when you're thinking about your gender identity or your sexuality that you have to find people who are only exactly like you. That is not true. It's up to you to decide what your community looks like and feels like. For me, finding Hidayah was actually life-changing, because I'd spent my whole life campaigning as a kind of solo artist, if you will, like living that lovely life of solitude, feeling quite alone despite the fact that I was out there and had a voice. And I'd always felt this kind of weird tension, like, what if other Muslims don't like me? Because in my experience, that's what's always happened. I kind of had that internalized Islamophobia, if you will. And I was worried as well, what if other LGBT people don't like me because I'm non-binary? Like, what if I have to go through that as well? So the concept of finding LGBTQIA plus Muslims was like, oh my God, will I ever find people who accept all of me? But then I found Hidayah, I found a few other groups as well, and it just really kind of made me feel at home because I didn't have to explain myself anymore. And that was really important to me because I am so tired of explaining every aspect of myself and having to justify whatever I do. But within Hidayah, I never had to do that. The second thing is learn your boundaries. You get to decide what you share with whom. You get to decide how that looks. You get to decide what you dress like and when. Like, if someone says you're not being authentic because in a situation for your own safety, you've decided not to dress or use the right pronouns that you normally do or kind of out yourself, then that's up to you and they have no right to decide what your safety should look like and force you into a situation of being unsafe. And similarly, if someone comes a knock in and says, I want to hear from you and I want you to talk about your story, you have every right to say no, because it's not just kind of something that everyone is entitled to. It's up to you to decide how you tell your story and when and if at all ever. And the third thing is, which kind of encompasses what I've already said, is that you know what's right for you right now. So if right now kind of being queer, being Muslim looks like, you know, just doing what you've always done, then just continue to do that. If it means some kind of change, then do that too. Just know that there are people out there, there is support out there, so that if you ever decide to do something that you've not done before or to think about something you hadn't thought about before, then there are people who are there to support you, and it doesn't have to be something that you carry by yourself, because I know for me, I spent my whole life being very kind of self-reliant and feeling like I could never ever trouble anyone with any of my troubles, least of all my own family, because I knew I could see what they were going through every single day. But I don't want anyone to feel like there isn't someone who's ready to listen. And that also goes without saying for your relationship with your religion. Sometimes my relationship with my religion has changed over time. Sometimes it's been stronger. Sometimes my faith has been weaker. Sometimes people have told me, like, you can't be Muslim. You've got to be an ex-Muslim now because you came out. And I'm like, well, that's up to me. I can make whatever decision I want. And whatever decision I make will be the right one. And I have every faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the people I love that I'm never going to fall, because there's always going to be someone there to catch me. Sorry to be so cliche.
One thing that I would say is that I came to terms with as well, that helped me understand that being LGBT and Muslim can be synonymous, right? Is that just because a person is dressed a certain way and they claim to be, you know, more understanding of the religion than you are, and that they're in a position of power within the religious community, they are no different than you under the eyes of God, just because they know the same book that we all read to a greater detail, right?
Yeah.
They have their own interpretation, as would you. And if you stand in lines of prayer at the mosque or at home with your family, and you feel positively impacted by religion, if you feel that your du'as have been heard, if you feel that you're benefiting from having Allah in your life, then your existence is affirmation enough, right, that you can be LGBTQ plus and Muslim, right? You don't need validation from anybody else, right? Because they just don't understand what it means to be LGBTQ plus. You can educate them if you want to, but that's not your responsibility. So just because the imam at the mosque says that, it is frightening that he's saying that to a lot of people, and he will, you know, definitely formulate a lot of views and opinions for very many people in the community. But just know that you are on the right path, and that, you know, LGBT people can be synonymous with faith, whether it, you know, be Islam or any other faith in the world. Right, you can be both.
Almass, final words?
I think what I'd say, thinking about the topic of this episode, is coming out, right? And I think that coming out first is an internal journey. So before you are ready to speak to anyone, just be comfortable with that conversation and that internal dialogue with yourself, because there'll be so many questions that come to you. And actually, like, it's nice to go through that process inward first. So when people come to you, you can actually say, well, oh, actually, I haven't thought about that yet, or I have thought about it and this is how I feel. And I think you just have to trust yourself above anyone and anything. That's in my most trying moments. I've always just thought, you know yourself, like, who you are, your values and your morals, like, remind yourself of that stuff. Because in this life, people will try and define you, and actually, like, they don't get to do that. And so I think that's the one thing is, like, strengthen that internal dialogue. Take that time. That's why we pray or we meditate or whatever it is that you do in your personal time, that conversation is so important, because when that door closes, you're only left with you, right? And those ghosts or those happy thoughts or sad thoughts, whatever they are, you have to make sure that you've kind of explored every crevice of your mind, because that stuff can take you by surprise sometimes, and you don't want to be your own enemy. I think that in the process of coming out, I think you practically thinking then, I would say, think about your safety. So as Sameer said, you called your friend, right? And you said, hey, like, I'm coming out to my family. Can I stay at yours? If you've got people around you that that you can rely on, set yourself up for safety just as a backup. And that might mean a manner of things. That might mean from your own family as well, saying, actually, mum, like, I'm going to speak to so-and-so. Can you just be on hand? Or best friend, or whatever it is. Just make sure that you've got that, because it's all well and good, like, wanting that freedom and that liberation, but we don't live in a world necessarily where everyone is kind. And I think we have to bear that in mind when we're moving. I would support the idea of community, like building your community. Your people are everything, and finding examples of yourself or parts of you that maybe overlap is really, really key. And I think the most frustrating thing that I think I've found is people telling me that, well, you can't be LGBT, and Muslim, you can't. And I'm like, well, I'm here. Like, you can, till the cows come home, you can say, right, that, like, actually it's wrong and you can't do it. But if the evidence is there in front of you, then what are you actually, like, arguing against? Because also Allah also made me. Right? And we're meant to respect each other and look after each other. And we're meant to, my version of Islam is, like, full of compassion and kindness and charity, and not full of, like, violence and judgment and, like, hate. So when people are saying you're not Muslim, and I'm like, that's weird, because, like, you're acting so far away from what I think and I believe, Islam and being a Muslim is. Yeah. So where does that put us? Because we're clearly, like, understanding the same thing in a different way. I think that's the main thing, is letting people know that we're here. And I think even this conversation in itself is so special, because I, in my wildest dreams, would not have thought 10 years ago that I'd be sitting recording a podcast about being queer and Muslim. There's no way. And I really hope that, like, this gets to people, so then they can hear it and see, actually, like, wow, like, we're cool, we're normal people. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're just people. And no one gets to speak on your faith. No one. Like, your conversation with the Almighty is your conversation with the Almighty. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to Judgment Day, no one else is with you. We've been told that from when you were born. When you told you that you are on your own. Yeah. So cool. Like, let me have that dialogue. Let me then explore it. Let me define Islam for what I think, and definitely interrogate things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for listening. If only you could feel the energy in this room. It is electric. It has been cathartic. It has been powerful. I teared up a few times. But yeah, thanks for listening. And if you would like further information or support, head to our website at hidayahlgbt.co.uk. Hidayah is a support group that amplifies the voices of LGBTQI+ Muslims. We campaign for social justice to defeat the stigma, taboo, and discrimination faced by many within our communities. Our aim is to gain social acceptance as LGBTQI+ Muslims. Join us next week, where we'll be discussing Muslim stories. Thanks and goodbye.